Hi, my name is James Andrella, and you're listening to the Back to Human podcast. On the show with me today, I have Eatrawmeat, the gentleman that runs a page on Instagram by the same name. Today, we're going to be discussing the Primal diet. I'm sure if you've been on social media, you've probably become aware of the trends such as the carnivore diet or the lion diet, where you're eating only animal products or ruminants. And the Primal diet actually takes it a step further, where you're consuming raw meat, which can apparently heal many of our modern day ailments. Now would probably be a good time to mention that none of the following information should be taken as medical advice. Make sure to consult with your physician before you make any lifestyle or dietary changes. And after following Eatrawmeat and a few other primal dieters on Instagram for a while, along with reading some books such as Pottinger's Cats and We Want to Live, I really wanted to learn what this lifestyle looked like on a day-to-day basis, and I look forward to taking a deeper dive today. Without further ado, Eatrawmeat, welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks for having me, James.
I have not taken the plunge myself. Still eating cooked meat, but the other day I will say that I tried out raw picanha, and I was pleasantly surprised by the taste of it. My fiance wasn't too pleased with it, so hopefully we can get into how this works in relationships. But tell me a little bit about your background. How'd you grow up, and how'd you get started with the Primal diet?
I grew up pretty normal upbringing, suburban kid, not exactly small city in Ohio. And I had my share of health problems growing up, asthma, eczema. And as I progressed in the medical system, and every year I had, earaches and sore throats, I get some antibiotics, and eventually I ended up becoming kind of, depressed and, maybe a little, I don't know, just despondent. I mean, I never had trouble getting out of bed or anything, but, it's just sort of, I guess, onset slowly over time. And I think, the antibiotics were probably a driving factor in that, along with everything else that comes along with life that weighs you down. And I started eating raw meat in 2018. I started seeing people online eat raw meat and talking about Aajonus, people like Sverige and Frank Tofano. And I thought, well, what do I have to lose? This is something that could help me. And I see other people talking about it and how it helps them. I've always been interested in, health, having had some health problems prior, that, maybe there's another way, because you go into the doctor's office sometimes and they don't really take you seriously. They're kind of like, well, I'm going to look at you and I'm going to tell you what I see. And because I'm a doctor, that's right. And I'm not going to listen to you and your experience, because you're not a doctor and you don't know what you're talking about. So, that's kind of what set it off. And then I started eating. Basically, I just jumped into it. I was eating, I got the raw liver from a butcher, and raw eggs and honey from a friend. And I was just eating a lot of that, and I felt great, because, that was pretty much the first time in my life. I mean, I grew up, I had a mom who cooked a lot of home cooked meals, and we had meat, most nights, but it was like, when you're getting those raw nutrients, for the first time, it's like, wow. And then I started making high meat right away and was eating that within, 1 to 2 months. So, and then just, ground beef and cheap cuts of steak. And then eventually, once you kind of get past the psychological barrier, it was, pork and chicken. And of course, sushi. Everybody knows sushi. That's not weird. So
Yeah.
doing stuff like that. And then eventually I was, getting into some vegetable juice, dabbling with that. And then 2 years in eating raw foods, I finally secured a source of raw dairy. And that's when everything kind of started to come together for me. And the raw milk was just, it's amazing. It's heaven. I don't know. I used to
Hmm.
feel like I couldn't live without it. But now that I've been drinking it for 4 years now, I I definitely don't have the appetite for it.
Hmm.
I usually drink it fermented, and I do usually 2 cups to 1 quart a day. Sometimes a half gallon if I'm not eating meat that day. But yeah, so that's how I got started in a nutshell.
So you pretty much described what I want to call it normal, because you said you grew up like with a normal life. You were visiting the doctors and such. That's our common experience. I wouldn't say that it should be normal, but it's really interesting that you went from what were you eating? Were you eating like processed food? You said you were eating home cooked meals. Were you eating like cereal, breads,
Oh
grains?
yeah. I mean, cereal every morning, not every morning, but most mornings. And I did some traveling internationally, and that kind of set me on a different path because I was in Nepal. I was eating fresher foods, more local foods, less processed foods. Don't get me wrong, I'd buy like a Snickers bar every night for dessert, and I'd buy a Coca-Cola to eat with my roti in the afternoon. But I was eating raw dairy for the first time, um, curd they called it, and lassies and just plain, um, and with muesli, which is kind of like a oats and nut mixture and fruit, and obviously lentils, and it really expanded my culinary horizons, and I felt much better eating that. Of course, there were times where I had very strong detoxes, um, and that might have been because I got travel injections, and sometimes they can come out like when you're traveling. So that was quite an experience. But yeah, living somewhere else and then seeing how they eat was a lot to take in, because in America, like, yeah, everything is so processed, and we don't have a strong food culture. We're pretty young as a society, as a country, compared to everywhere else. Um, and because of the massive drive and influx for urbanization, and how the media kind of works with advertising companies for food and agriculture, it kind of sets us up in a food cage. And people notoriously have had bad, just bad experiences or bad histories with food. It's really not so great in America. We don't really care about ingredients. If it's processed, who cares? um, so yeah, I mean, I did all that stuff, but eventually I realized my body felt better without a lot of that. And I kind of got into sports and athletics just before starting the diet, but I was eating a pretty clean diet. I mean, rice, a vegetable, and then some meat. I tried to cut out meat, but that only worked for like 3 days. I would eat like hard boiled eggs with my rice and cabbage or broccoli or something. And after 3 days, I was like, I can't do this. I need the meat. I mean, I'd still eat junk food too, but I was pretty active, and it wasn't. And when I say junk food, I mean like ice cream. I used to bake a lot, so I had a sweet tooth, so I learned to bake kind of young to satisfy that. I got pretty good at it, but I cut that out too. It was especially starting this diet, because I don't want to mix, like, oh, I'm gonna have cookies and then I'm gonna go have my raw meat, or I'm gonna have
Yeah.
a piece of pie after my my meat meal. Now it's like I make a berry smoothie or something, or a milkshake, and that's plenty. The milk and the honey was very instrumental in breaking my sweets addiction. Because anytime I wanted something sweet, I would just drink that. And after 2 weeks, for me, I stopped kind of having those cravings. Um, so in combination, the raw fats and the honey, it really helped break that cycle.
That's like one of my favorite things too. I still consume milk pretty much daily. Right now, I'm currently doing a fast. I don't know where I'll head after this, if I will just dive into raw meat eating or just stick with my cooked for a little bit, trying to dip my toes in a little bit. But I like what you referred to the United States as the America, where it's like a food cage, and how in the beginning you said you grew up normally. So if you have like a caged bird or caged lions, animal that grew up only in a domesticated state where all you know is within these walls, that's going to seem very, very normal to you. But then when you got the exposure, it's kind of like a pivotal moment where a light bulb went off. It's like, wait, what am I doing? And so you tried out what would be almost like a vegan or a vegetarian approach, because you tried ditching the meat for a little bit. I know I tried veganism for maybe like a week and a half, and I kind of am ashamed of it now, where I ate like the Impossible Burger, but I was angry, dude. Like I was hungry nonstop. Like I craved the meat, so that wasn't for me. I know some people may be able to get away with it, but personally, I feel best when I do have some meat, and especially like red meat in my diet. So, what benefits have you experienced since going down this route of raw meat eating?
Well, I had some sports injuries that healed up. I used to do Kyokushin karate. I used to compete, and I had messed up my wrists. I busted a couple knuckles, couple bones in my left foot. Getting kicked in the legs a lot was tough. So my little bit of my like right knee, or like right above that part. I don't know what you call that physiologically, but yeah, stuff like that. And I had taken a few falls. I slipped. I was running to catch the bus when I was in college, and I just slipped at the top of this hill, and I came down really hard on my shoulder, my body, and it messed up my shoulder. I couldn't move my arm for a few days, and um, that still kind of caused me problems. But anything like muscle or bone or joint related, it's eventually gotten better. Um, and that is, yes, because of the diet, but one of the other components to the primal diet are hot baths. So if you if you have municipal water, you would add some milk, apple cider vinegar, and salt is one formula to neutralize the poisons in the water. But that heat is really instrumental in promoting healing. Hot water bottles or something else I have. Like if I was at the river, floating down the river with some friends, and we were at a waterfall afterwards, and I lost my footing and planted pretty hard on some rocks when I caught my footing. And I don't know if it was like a stress fracture or something, but I got a bruise on the ball of my foot, and it started hurting pretty bad. And I just put some heat on. I sandwiched that between some hot water bottles for a couple nights, and you know, being on the diet as I am, I also included some pineapple, and it was better in like the week. It was not a problem. So yeah, heat is really important. And then there's different kinds of meats heal different things. So I was primarily eating a lot of beef, so that really helped like the glands, the organs, the muscles, and your blood and the bones. Um, and I probably would say it took 3 to 4 years for stuff to start like stop causing me, pain. Like I get this tension or stiffness in my wrist, and I don't get that anymore. And um, same with my knuckles in my hand, especially when I'm trying to manipulate things. It would get kind of sore or tired around here, but it doesn't really happen anymore. Thankfully, I haven't had too many, serious injuries. And I guess in terms of, not just physically, but, mentally and even emotionally in some aspects. Um, I ate like fish paste for whole years, just fish pate with some sour cream, and that was uh, that was an experiment trying to heal my tinnitus or tinnitus. And although I still have ringing, I was really sensitive to sounds where, like, if it was loud, like I was just like covering my ears. I wouldn't want to be around it at all. Um, and that kind of went away. The severity or the sensitivity of noise. But yeah, tinnitus is something a lot of people struggle with. I've talked to a few people who are on the diet who still, are struggling with it. But I feel like mine is, there's good days and bad days, but hopefully it's on the downward trajectory. I know someone, Phoenix, he's kind of heading up primaldietcoaching.com, which is our website, and he had tinnitus or tinnitus. He says he doesn't have ringing at all anymore, almost, unless it's like he's around some loud noise or a lot of EMF. But he says, yeah, his is pretty much gone. But that's after, years and years. So you just got to be patient and stay positive.
Yeah. So it's not going to be like an overnight shift. If you've been eating or living this way for decades, you can't really expect it to go away within just a few weeks. So that can dissuade some people. And you mentioned that you went through some detoxes. So what detox symptoms did you experience? How did you know that it was a detox? And what did you do to get through that?
So when I first started, I had very light detoxifications, which was mostly like headaches, light colds or flus, basically. My nose would run like a faucet for 3, 4 days, and then it would stop. Um, I'd get a little bit of a sore throat and some tonsil stones sometimes, um, but nothing too severe. When I started to incorporate the raw dairy into my diet, more vegetable juices, and I experiment with things like moldy berries, that really set off strong detoxifications. I guess the way I could describe it is like really, if they're really severe, and they're not always really severe, they can last for an afternoon to, a couple days to a week. Um, like cold and flu symptoms, basically. And, Aajonus, he'll say, well, if anything's uncomfortable or out of the ordinary, like that's a detox. Like you lose all the hair on your arm, like that's a detox. If you have, a lot of diarrhea or you're vomiting, that's the body evacuating poisons that it's, getting rid of in your tissues, dumping them into the bowels, and then the body's getting rid of them one way or another. Um, just very extreme headaches, like very extreme throbbing headaches, high fevers. I had a fever of like 104.7 for like 3 days, and I felt terrible, right? But it wasn't like I was kind of surprised my temperature was that high, and you know when my temperature gets that high, or when I get those severe headaches, which I don't know if I would call them meningitis. They certainly check a lot of the boxes for what people will call meningitis, which is supposed to be, like deadly, go to the hospital. But, I would just get in a hot bath. And, like 102 to 110 is the range that's, safe to be in. And I get in at 110. Usually that's pretty hot, but when I'm detoxing, and I know I'm detoxing when I get into the bath, and that temperature just feels like normal. It feels like you're getting wrapped in healing warmth, and it's very nice. And that it probably cuts, anywhere from like 15 to 30% the severity of the symptoms like the next day. So if you're going through a detox and you can take a hot bath, that's like key. It's so helpful. And might not have an appetite. I had a bowel thing for about 4 or 5 days, where I was going to the bathroom every 15 minutes, at least, every waking hour. And I was pretty worried because I was like, well, I can't eat and I'm having all these bowel movements. I called, I asked Phoenix and he said, no, that's okay. Just eat light and don't worry about it. Just let it pass. And eventually, yeah, I got better. I was out of cheese at the time also because it got lost in the mail, which was horrible. So any type of bowel discomfort like heartburn or acid reflux, stomach ache, if you eat a piece of cheese, it'll start to reduce, and you just keep eating cheese, little pieces of cheese until it goes away. So eventually I got cheese during that at the end, and that made a big difference. But obviously I wasn't able to go to work. I had a terrible headache, those headaches at the same time. And it was, yeah, I mean, when you're detoxing, you'll know it's not kind of like, oh, how do I feel today? Am I detoxing? It's like, no, you'll know. And it's, it's tough, but healing takes time. So there's no quick fixes really. Um, whether whether you have a health problem and you're trying to fix it, or you do end up going through detox, it's nothing worth doing is ever easy. So, and then at the end of that detox, you feel better. You have a different kind of baseline, I guess is the way to say it. Um,
That's a really difficult concept for, I'd imagine, a lot of people to wrap their heads around where, okay, you're detoxing and the answer that you were given is just, that's fine, ride it out, you'll be okay. What we tend to seek, at least in this culture, is comfort. So the moment that someone experiences like a headache or some type of joint pain, they're going for the aspirin, they're going for the Aleve, or they want to suppress the detox symptoms. So I remember when I went to, like you said, you were kind of going to the bathroom every 15 minutes. I went to Puerto Rico and I had some questionable sushi. So I went to a food truck at a gas station, got really good ratings. I knew it was kind of sketchy. I ate some and my vacation was pretty much on the toilet. Couldn't eat, didn't have a stomach for anything. And I remember in Aajonus's book, he mentioned eating like moldy berries or some other type of moldy fruit in like a smoothie or so. So how do you know the difference between something that's acute, like my sushi situation, or how do you know that you're not just detoxing like the moldy berries? And how do you differentiate that detox, potentially like you consume the poison, and then something that's like lingering from the past?
well, the difference is that we do have poisons in our body. If we've been to the doctor's office, it's likely that you have a substantial amount of poison in your body, and that's barring just living in a modern constructed house or going to a school, which they have a lot of cleaning chemicals, a lot of different stuff. What's in the food, even if you're cooking it. Um, so, well, maybe especially because when you cook food, you cauterize the minerals in the food. So that makes free radicals, heavy metals, which go into your body. Um, but that's kind of a different tangent there. But the thing with mold is it's like bacteria, fungus, mold, viruses, parasites. These things exist as janitors. It's kind of like when you talking in your example about comfort. Taking something to feel better. It's like your body's response to things is healing. So, I mean, I'm not saying you get into a car accident, right? And you break your leg. That's not healing. Like your body's going to heal from that, but it's not the car accident. So like, but when I take a moldy berry, when I eat mold, I mean, it's got mold on it. Um, the mold has a mechanism. It uses a mechanism called bioabsorption. And what that does is it will link or absorb heavy metals and break them down. So when people have reactions to mold, it's not necessarily the mold that's causing it, it's the reaction to the mold in the body. What is the mold doing in the body? There's, stuff in the body because humans have lived, with all of these things, these parasites, bacteria, fungus. I mean, since there's ever been humans. So, to say that like, oh, it's a mold toxicity issue, it's like, well, you're the one that's toxic. It's the same thing, with your sushi, like the bacteria on the sushi, um, obviously started to, go after something that was in your body that needed to be ejected. Your body was able to use that bacteria and nutrients to um, battle something that was in your body. Um, and I mean, it's the same thing. Like, yeah, I eat, raw chicken and stuff, but I don't get sick from the raw chicken. But after a while, like I'll gain enough weight and I'll have enough nutrients that my body decides, okay, it's time to go into a detox and eliminate this stuff. For whatever reason, maybe my fat stores have become saturated with pollution that's come from the environment, or it's saturated with toxins that are coming out of the glands or the organs or connective tissues in my body. And it's like, okay, well, we're just going to take care of this now. And that's what they do. There's helminthic therapy, which maybe you've heard of. It's people using parasites to treat what are called the autoimmune disorders, which, may not. There's a lot of different theories out there. There's like, germ theory, there's terrain theory. There's people who say that, maybe the terrain doesn't really even exist. And it's really kind of hard to know, like, for sure what is going on there. I think, living your experience is probably the only way, like, for you for sure to know. But these people, they willingly put parasites in their body to fix their issues like IBS or asthma. Dr. Joel Weinstock was sort of a pioneer with this. He noticed he worked in the agriculture academic sector, and he had pigs, and he noticed that his pigs living in a very sterile environment were sick, which doesn't really make sense because you think, oh, if they're living in a clean environment, they should be healthy. But then he realized that when he gave these pigs, was it trichinosis or whipworm or something like that, their health improved. So he gave these people parasites for their IBS, and every 6 months they would come back to see him to get more parasites because they helped their condition. Their condition improved because of the parasites. So to say that, parasites are an enemy, not that there are parasites that don't belong in the human body. There are certainly parasites that, do not belong in the human body. But I think in general, there's parasites that we have kind of coexisted with that have helped us and have been, janitors. And they have a different ratio of, waste that's expelled, the bacteria, viruses, parasites, and mold. They all have waste products, right? Because they're like living things. They consume something and then they excrete waste. So I'm not sure of the exact ratios, but I know parasites expel the least waste product in terms of a detoxification mechanism, a janitor. And viruses expel the most, or rather, viruses, they work to just dissolve tissues that are toxic, and they don't have a mechanism where they will like process it and reduce the amount of waste in the body. So that's why I think when you have a virus or a flu, it'll feel worse in some ways than a bacteria or something. So like a bacterial detoxification. because everything is just being let loose into your body, which is why it's necessary to have, some nutrients in your body to help sequester those and get them out of the body, whether that's sipping on raw cream or taking some unsalted raw cheese, and then, eating things like tomatoes, cucumbers, just to kind of help keep your electrolytes up and keep your body a little cool.
So what theory do you kind of subscribe to? So you just mentioned that terrain theory may not exist. I mean, I don't believe in germ theory. You mentioned flus too. And this is something that I noticed with my health. Like, people could be sick around me, but they could be coughing, sneezing, whatever. They have boogers on me. Like, I really don't get sick. It's very rare that I get sick. And actually, rewind back to Puerto Rico when I had that detox like symptoms where I was on the toilet forever. What I've also noticed is whenever I'm going through like a huge breakthrough in my life, or I'm about to make like some commitment, some decision, that's when I'll get sick. So to give you an example, when I went to Puerto Rico, I was planning to propose to my fiance. So I was like making a commitment. I was stepping into this. And what I took that as is psychologically, okay, was it the sushi that really made me sick? Or is it like all these habits, all these personality traits, these characteristics that I was holding on to before this moment? Like, those have to go. So have you seen anything like psychologically similar to that?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a component. I don't know, maybe, I guess you could say psychologically, or maybe mentally and emotionally. So, every time you have like an emotion, or if you experience trauma, that gets stored in the body because it's stress hormones are released and they get stored in the body essentially. So, there is really something to that. And, for instance, like if you, like if you're feeling, if you wake up and you're feeling angry, and it's like, well, I just woke up. Why do I feel angry? It could be because of something that happened in the past that your body's processing for some reason, or you're like sad and you feel like crying. There's definitely a mental, emotional component to health and how it affects our body physically, for sure. Because stress is not fun. Everybody knows stress is bad. And it had the effects it has on our body it's undeniable. So, yeah, definitely. And it doesn't really matter, how good of a diet you eat. I feel eating this way and having the raw fat does help me cope better with things. It doesn't mean I'm not stressed, or I get stressed sometimes. How that, you know, how that works, it's not like, it's definitely a little different than how you would think of physically. Like, oh, I'm going to eat, I'll eat some moldy berries and I'm going to have, a detox like this. It's like an emotional thing. It can kind of just happen, and who knows all the, subconsciously how that would be set off or work, but it's definitely in there working, and your body, will process things. So that's,
you mentioned earlier how you felt like kind of despondent at one point. So now, since you switched over and you're eating raw meats and such, do you feel happier? Do you feel like you have more clarity?
yeah. Clarity is a good word. I guess, relative to happy, I guess, contentment. And the biggest driver there was probably eating a lot of high meat. And I would eat mostly just high liver, which isn't necessarily recommended because it can cause detoxifications in some people, as opposed to just regular steak that you leave it in a jar and it rots. And, I don't know. I think the liver tastes good and I don't like the other high meats, but I never had any detoxifications. But after eating that, and sometimes I would eat like a whole jar. Like that would just be my dinner. I would just put a whole jar in a bowl and eat that. But like really a couple tablespoons is really all you need every few days. But after a while, eating all that bacteria, in addition to, fermented dairy and just raw meat in general, my mood definitely improved and I feel a little bit more robust, I guess. Things I can kind of brush things off a little easier and I feel more balanced. Also, it's a little ironic, but when I started eating more high meat, my bad breath started to go away. And then I also noticed that improvement in my mood, that balancing. So that's kind of interesting. How like if you have bad breath, that's obviously it's a symptom of something deeper like bacterially, but that also affects, your mood and your mind and everything too. So that's and don't get me wrong, there's everybody has days where they're feeling kind of, like in a rut or some things are just difficult and you're trying to deal with them. But so I said it's important to stay positive because if you're on this diet and you just focus on how sick you are, how poisoned you are, you're not necessarily going to get better because you're creating a mental block in your head. So you just have to realize that, it's not really, well, some things may be kind of an overnight change. I don't want to be too, there are some things where like, yeah, I ate raw meat and then I had the best sleep I ever had, for like years. That's like an instant change, right? But in terms of like, health problems someone would be dealing with, they may not go away in a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. So you have to be positive and you have to keep at the process and just kind of trust the process. And that's, not for everybody, not everybody wants to do that and that's fine. But, I think if you are going to try this, you have to be patient and diligent in what you're doing with your body. And it would help to keep a journal or something too. So.
Yeah, I gotta imagine with any type of diet too, because if you're getting rid of the processed stuff, you're gonna probably experience some type of symptoms, some type of detox symptoms, and there can be this fine line between you questioning whether this is actually benefiting you or if it's causing you harm, especially if they are severe symptoms. If you have 104 fever, it's like, I kind of want to get rid of this. I don't know if I'm going to die from this. People tend to panic. What is high meat, by the way? I've never heard of that before.
It's meat that's basically rotten. I have a jar here actually. So you cut up meat of your choice into small chunks, and then you fill it in a ball jar like this, halfway, because you need the air. And then you air it out every few days, and over time the bacteria breaks it down. I like using these lids, these metal lids with the seal, because they'll keep the air a little better. The plastic lids don't work so well, but yeah, I like using those. And then, this I haven't aired out in some months, because I used to eat a lot of this stuff, and eventually my appetite for it kind of just waned. Like your body will crave things, and you kind of have to evaluate like what you're craving. Like, oh, I'm craving, sweets and stuff. It's like, okay, so your blood sugar's low. Maybe don't eat cookies, but have some honey and some berries and some cream or something, or some honey and butter. Something that's gonna be helpful for you and satisfy that craving. But with the high meat, it's just like I used to really enjoy it. But now I don't really have too much of a compulsion for it. So it just kind of, it's just on standby. So if I want it, I'll go and I'll air it out again to restart the process. But it's something that's, like, you want to use fresh meat for quality meat. Um, yeah, cut it up in small chunks, leave it in a jar, air it out every few days. And then after a month, it'll start to decompose enough to where it's like high meat. Um, as I said, liver is the best tasting, but can carry a risk of a detoxification. Um, wasn't the case for me and some others, but also some other people reported, detoxes from that. So you just gotta watch it. But if you take like steak or something and you do the same process, it's definitely going to be stinkier, but it won't carry the heightened risks of detoxification. I mean, there's always a risk of detoxification anytime you're consuming fermented foods, even if it's just like regular high steak. Though it'd probably be good to be on the diet for 6 months before you tried that stuff. But if you have a case of like really bad depression or something, then it might be something that would be worth the risk. Like you just have to weigh the pros and the cons. So that's one thing about this diet too, is you really have to pay attention and do your research, or talk to coaches who've been there, because you could do something and you might think it's healthy, but it can cause problems. Like if you eat a lot of raw fat and you're not getting enough minerals, like especially if you like, raw cream is delicious. If you're getting a lot of raw cream into your diet and you're not compensating with minerals, either in the way of like shellfish or cheese and honey, then you run the risk of osteoporosis, or your teeth starting to degrade, because your body is going to use the cream as a little bit of solvent. It's going to help detox and move things out of your body, and without replacing and adding minerals, it can kind of weaken some things in your body. And that's kind of an extreme example, but another one is like lemon. Like too much lemons, they tend to zap the fat out of your skin. So like if you eat too many lemons, you might find that I do anyway, my lips, especially here, get dry and cracked. So I limit my lemon usage. Let's see what else. You get too much fruit in general because it ferments into alcohol in our stomach. So like a piece of fruit a day with a good amount of raw fat is a way to circumvent too much of a detoxification reaction from fruit, because like I said, it ferments into alcohol in our stomach, which is a solvent, and then your body's going to use that solvent to discard certain things. Different fruits do different things, so it's important to pay attention to some of these things, because if you do too much of it, it could impact your health, like you said. And that's above and beyond just like eating a piece of moldy cheese or a moldy berry or a piece of rotten meat. The bacteria is what's good for it, what your body needs, but it's what's in your body already that's a problem.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around the high meat, because I was going to get into, it's like, could you eat rotten meat and it wouldn't affect your body? But I think that's the challenging part too, is if you're consuming something like high meat and you have a detoxification reaction, I feel like most people, myself included, would be like, oh, I just ate something that's poisonous, similar to my sushi situation. So trying to differentiate what's what there is really difficult for myself. And you mentioned the minerals. I know that Aajonus and you said it here, like unsalted raw cheese, and to avoid salt. So I have books like The Salt Fix and another book by Dr. David Brownstein, where they're actually recommending salt. So is there a difference between just typical sodium chloride, table salt, and like sea salt that actually has all the other minerals with it too?
So there's different kinds of salt, like you said. Table salt is usually iodized, so it's a processed salt, and it has iodine added to it, which is toxic. Um, and eating a lot of that can cause thyroid problems. The difference between the salts is it's still a rock. It's still salt in rock form. There's trace minerals in sea salts. It's not really it's not a lot. I mean, Celtic sea salt or Himalayan sea salt, 88% of that is sodium chloride, or like 85%, something like that. It's mostly just sodium chloride. Um, and this rock salt, it's in a rock form, right? So, when we eat something like that, it's not in a form that we can totally digest and utilize. It's very concentrated. So what it does when we consume it, what we can or don't use gets stored in our tissues. Um, it also promotes cell death because it works against cells, hydrating cells. It makes them explode essentially. It also fractionates nutrients when you're consuming it with raw food. Now, if you're on a regular, cooked food diet and you're eating some salt, it's probably okay as long as the salt isn't iodized. It might even be beneficial if you're eating cooked foods, not just to make them taste, palatable, right? Because you ate your raw picanha steak. Imagine eating a steak that's, cooked and you didn't put any seasonings on it. I mean, is that as appealing as just a piece of raw steak? I don't think so. So that's why, people use spices and stuff. Not that I don't use some stuff from time to time to spice up my meat meals, but um, generally I'm satisfied with just the natural flavors of the meat. So salt too also produces an adrenaline type reaction, um, which is why some people like it. It's why people will turn to things like, smoking or, in a very the extreme example, drugs, because people are craving, hormones, and hormones are 60, 80% made of fat. So you can just trace the issue back to a lack of fat in your diet, raw fat in your diet. So your body is craving these hormones to compensate for what you're not getting in your diet. And that could be like, stress hormones or love. I mean, basically anything that's going to create feelings. You look at people who have, a fixation on things, or like people like to smoke, or like maybe some people like a lot of drama. Like some people get addicted. You can get addicted to anything. And when I say that, it's kind of like it's not necessarily like the action, but it's the mechanism which causes the action, whether it's like gambling or skydiving, or you can think of anything that like produces a rush in the body, and people get addicted to the rush. It's not necessarily like, if you're gambling, you're skydiving, you're smoking. It's what the body generates as a result to that stuff. So if you replace that with some raw fats, I think most people can easily overcome that, and rerouting, those behaviors and habits into like something more productive. That's really where it comes from. So that's why I think salt is popular, because it makes cooked food taste good, and it makes people feel good because of this reaction in their body, which is, not necessarily a healthy thing. And, maybe some people need salt a little bit, like 1 to 2 grains, maybe, a week or something, I think is what, Aajonus recommends. But yeah, I haven't had any salt. I don't miss it. Um, I think a year ago, I was going through a pretty rough detox. I needed to go back to work, and I was visiting my mother, and she had just made dinner, and so I ate a piece of cooked chicken breast, and I tried a piece of broccoli, which I used to like, but I couldn't even eat the broccoli because it was so salty. And my mom does not use a lot of salt anyway. Like she's pretty healthy conscious persons, not a lot of salt. And I was surprised at how I was repulsed. When I ate that piece of broccoli, it tastes like I just got some salt water in my mouth or something. It was that bad. So you build up a tolerance to that salt, and once you stop, you kind of realize like kind of how gross it is. It's almost like smoking. Like you smoke cigarettes, and it's like the first time it's like, it's like I kind of feel good, but I kind of feel gross, but I want more. And then you stop smoking for a while, and then you try to have one, and it's like, oh, how could I do that? Like, so yeah, it's for salt, I do celery juice and beet juice, like because beets have a lot of chloride, celeries have a lot of sodium. You can also do unsalted raw cheese with honey to get those minerals. Shellfish is a great way. Oysters, they've got they're a nice palate cleanser. Any shellfish, fish as well have quite a bit of sodium. Sodium in raw milk. So there's a lot of ways to get this, in your diets without, you're like, oh, I'm worried about not having salt and you get dehydrated. It's like, no, you're not. But yeah, that's pretty much it about salt.
That's interesting that it has like a adrenaline type response, because there's people that recommend doing like salt in your water first thing in the morning. It gives you like this energy boost. And like, I remember reading that Aajonus said, if you're taking some type of supplement or something externally that is giving you some type of energetic boost, there's a good chance that it's actually toxic.
Right. Yeah, because your body, it doesn't know how to process it, or it's exposed to something contaminated. Like in supplements, usually they're dissolved in petrochemicals. Ethyl alcohol is a big one that a lot of places use, and that's a petroleum derived alcohol. So yeah, super toxic. But yeah, taking stuff like that, your body's going to react to it just like any sort of toxin or drug.
So you get your minerals then from the cheeses, the dairy, or even your meat, because you were mentioning before, and we can get into it now, that when you cook food, it cauterizes the minerals. Mm-hmm. So what is the harm in eating cooked foods, or what else happens when you heat foods?
When you cook food, you're creating acrylamides, heterocyclic amines, and lipid peroxides, which are, carcinogens. You're also, killing the bacteria and removing the enzymes from the food. So when you eat, I guess I'll start with when you eat a piece of raw food, right? It has all that stuff in it, the bacteria, the enzymes, and your body can process it better because it's a live food that has enzymes in it already. And the bacteria as well were bacterial beings. When you cook the food and you remove all that, and then you add these other things to it, your pancreas basically has to take enzymes from somewhere else if you're not getting them when you're eating, and then use those to help process the cooked foods. So it's more work for your body to eat the cooked foods than to eat the raw foods.
That makes sense.
Essentially, in a nutshell.
Yeah, I was wondering because I read Pottinger's Cats a while ago. I had a cat that we kind of just picked up from the street. It was a funny story where we're walking around my neighborhood, and I joke with my fiance where I'm like, if he walks up to us, we're taking him home. And this is like a street cat. They were feeding him, and he did walk straight up to us as soon as I said this. So like, I'm a man of my word. I gotta take him now. So we bring him home, and he was used to eating like whatever processed foods that they're feeding animals, which I like that you actually brought up the pigs before and how the pigs were getting sick in a sterile environment, because I think that the animal world kind of reflects, at least the domesticated animal world, kind of reflects in the domesticated human world, where we're kind of in this cage and we have all these illnesses. Meanwhile, we think that being clean is the best thing to do. So we started feeding him cooked food, just because that's all he would typically eat. And then I tried to transition him over to raw diet, and he would eat it initially, but come to find out, I don't know how old he was because we literally just picked him up from the street. I don't know what type of injections that he had when you visit the vet because he had these little lumps on him. So I believe that they're called sarcomas, which are very common in pets that receive injections, the V word. And he went into like kidney failure. He ended up dying. But when I was reading the book Pottinger's Cats, it stated how the cats that Pottinger was working with, they were robust and they were thriving when they were eating raw meats or raw milk. Meanwhile, the cats that were fed cooked foods, they became weaker to the point where eventually they were stale. They were infertile. And he stated that it would take like 8 generations, I think that it was, to get back to a healthy cat from the state that they were currently at. But I was thinking, doing the research, trying to reverse my cat's kidney problems, I came across, I think it was calcium and phosphorus. There's like an inverse relationship there. So if they're not getting the bones, if they're not eating like bones, which a lot of people freak out if you give a dog a bone. It's like their stomach acid, they can break that down. Like if they're out in the wild, they're eating the whole damn animal. They're not just picking off like a little chicken thigh and be like, oh yeah, I just want this piece of meat. I'm going to leave the bones. They're going to eat the whole thing. So there was an imbalance between the calcium and phosphorus there. And he stopped drinking as well. So when I got into a little bit further research, what I noticed was that cats, they don't really drink a ton of water. They actually get their hydration from the meat. So I was thinking if we're cooking the meat, we're kind of dehydrating the meat.
Yep.
Would that be true?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, if you do have dogs on a kibble diet, or even just people, they crave all this water, it's because they're not getting it through their food. And water is another thing. It's like if you drink too much water, especially if you're drinking, tap water, municipal water, I mean, it's just poison. But, drinking water, it'll flush out the nutrients in your body. Because water has minerals in it, but without the nutrients and the minerals together, they will kind of work against your body because it'll be pulling out the nutrients to bind with the minerals. Like purified water, like that doesn't really have anything in it, so it's just gonna leach everything from your body because water is a solvent. But that's what can cause kidney problems too, is like if you're drinking a lot of water fast, it'll go right to your kidneys and it'll dilute your kidneys because kidneys aren't really supposed to do that. They're not supposed to be like this big filter thing. Raw fat is really what's hydrating, and that is because in the Krebs cycle, when the body processes fat, H2O is a byproduct. So if you're eating fat, you're getting water as a result. As a natural result of your body's processes. But yeah, there's water in meat too. Different cuts have different amounts. But that's one way. Vegetable juice is another way to get a lot of good hydration, or a sport formula, which is a mixture of certain ingredients: tomato, cucumber, watermelon, and some other things. Raw milk, raw eggs. Most raw foods have, some sort of water in them the body can utilize.
That's something that I personally notice is where if I'm drinking more raw milk throughout the day, that I don't feel like I need to hydrate as much.
Right, yeah, because you got the water in the milk, but you also have the fat, which gets broken down into water. And like you said, like with cats, that's something that's, you can see. And the cat, stopping drinking was probably a symptom of something, like it was, dying, because usually animals, they have a weird way of showing or not showing that they're, ill. But I noticed my sister, she got a cat a little while ago, and he's a little kitten. She has an older cat who's 10. He won't eat raw meat, but the little one will. He went, I gave him a piece of raw chicken. He went right for it, and he was begging for me. It was pretty cute to see. But yeah, it's amazing. If you don't start pets on a raw diet when they're younger, it can be harder to start them later because they're not used to it and they don't understand. So you almost kind of have to make them fast for a day to get them hungry to, eat and try something new. or, some people say if you fast, it kind of resets your body. So I don't know if that's happening or whatever, but I know with some dogs too, like some dogs don't like certain kinds of meat, like red meat or white meat or pork or fish. Some don't care, but some won't eat certain kinds of meat. But dogs certainly should get bones, a lot of good raw bones, for sure. So cats, maybe, but they don't. I don't know that they would chew the bones like dogs. I'd imagine their tongues would be able to get most of the nutrients like off the bone, but I don't know that cats would eat bones from like a chicken, maybe a smaller bird or like a sardine or something. A little bit more easy for them.
So how do you source your meat then? You mentioned earlier how you want good quality meat. How do you source it and how would you preserve it?
Yeah, so I get fresh meat. The fresh versus frozen thing is kind of a hot issue in the primal diet world. Aajonus is on record stating that fresh meat is better, and his parameters for fresh meat in terms of what is excuse me, healthy are actually surprisingly lax, because he says you could just go to the supermarket and buy a steak and eat that. But I know some people who would rather get meat that is not from the supermarket. So stuff that doesn't have hormones or is grain fed with, glyphosate grains, that has injections. They would rather have, pristine 5-star meat without any of that stuff, with no chemicals that get sprayed by the USDA processing facilities, that has been frozen. They would rather eat that than fresh meat from the supermarket that has some contamination in it. And the argument is that because the food is raw, the contamination is bound in the nutrients and the ions of the food. So when you cook it, that stuff, the poisons become released and the body will digest more of them. But if it's raw, the body will digest less of them, because the toxins are already bound to nutrients and your body won't process them, that the body is intelligent enough to know to not process that. So this is based on Aajonus, one of his experiments, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, I forget why, but there are no records of his experiments or documentation. So it's kind of up to people to experiment and do their own experiments and find out for themselves. But he says that he took two groups of dogs, and it was kind of like the Pottinger study, except he fed one group frozen meat and he fed the other group fresh meat. And he reported that claims the dogs that got frozen meat, they developed mange and some other skin disorders. I know a farmer, and he feeds all his dogs frozen meat, and, the 5-star frozen meat. And none of them have mange, and some of them had health problems and they got better. So it's kind of, it's not a very, in my opinion, it's not a very good example. It's not a very good experiment, because we don't know the condition, the health, the breed, the age of dogs in the control groups. Maybe some dogs had more poisons and pollution in them in the frozen group than the fresh meat group. And we don't know how long this occurred. We don't know the type of meat that was frozen, that was used, and how it was frozen, which I think makes a difference if it's vacuum sealed versus if it was just on a plate or in a Ziploc bag, because a lot of those water soluble nutrients will be leached out of the meat. If you ever put meat in the freezer in just a regular bag, it's got a bunch of water on it, and that's the water in the meat that gets sucked out, all with that nutrients as well. So, personally for me, I'm a fresh meat kind of guy. I'm not going to spend top dollar on frozen meat, in my opinion. I'm lucky enough to live in a place where like I have a butcher that I go to. They raise their own cattle. No injections or medications of any kind. It's injection free, no hormones or anything. The only downside is that they feed their cattle grains, which get sprayed with glyphosate.
Mhm.
I haven't noticed any negative effects of that. Maybe it's too early to tell, but the cows are on pasture too, right? So they're not only eating those grains, they're supplemented with them, and
Mhm.
they're state inspected. So it's better to find meat that's state inspected because the USDA has certain protocols in terms of like what chemicals to use to spray the meat off because all the meat has to be sprayed, and they just use vinegar and water. So that's a lot better than the citric acid or what is it? Parasitic acid and lactic acid, all these artificial acids they get into the
Mhm.
meat. Um, so, I buy my meat once a week and I'll put it in a like a Pyrex or glass pan or ceramic dish or something with a lid. And I'll keep it in there and it stays pretty good for like 5 days, 7 days. At the end of 7 days it gets a little gamey, but it's not too bad. Um, Ball jars are a great way to store meat. You can fit about 2 pounds of meat in one of those quart ball jars that I had. So that's a good way to store meat. The more you fill it up, the less air, the longer it'll stay fresh. And yeah, I got a fish market too. I usually get a piece of swordfish every week, um, which I'll eat that day. But like I said, for smaller quantities, jars are good. Jars are nice. If you have something bigger, if you have a lot of meat for the week, that's what I do. Like it's cheaper to buy a roast or something like that. You can because of the steaks they charge you more. You can like, yeah, I want a rump roast or sirloin tip roast. It's going to be a little cheaper. It's easier for them as well. So like if you're cutting from a roast, the meat will stay fresher too because you're always cutting away whatever meat got oxidized or exposed to the oxygen. It's aging. If you think of like how dry aging works. So that's how I keep my meat fresh. My milk, I get it in plastic and I put it in glass as soon as I get home. I found a couple jars for free on Craigslist, 3-liter jars I lucked out. And you can find gallon jars sometimes. I don't know about ball jars, but ball jars, they have half gallon, which I'll also use. I'm saving up enough glass so I can use it at my herd share so I can just have my milk in glass. I don't have to worry about changing it every week.
Hmm.
And some milk I'll leave on the counter to let it ferment. And some I keep in the refrigerator for my baths or just to drink while I'm in the bath. Because if you use curdled milk in your bath, it's going to turn into cheese. It's going to stick to your hair. It's a really big mess. Yeah, and it's really annoying too. It's pulling on your hairs. It's bad. Um, so I used to get my milk not refrigerated. If you can get dairy and you can get it not refrigerated, that's the key. It's twice as effective. I drank that for like a year, and I'm just realizing now having to switch back because my farmer. I mean, it was a pain. It's a pain in the ass for him. Bless him. God bless him for doing that for me. But as it got to a point where he's like, "Hey, I can't do this anymore," it's like, okay. But I swear, like it's twice as effective in healing. Um, it also tastes better and it ferments better. Um, I've gotten used to how it ferments now, but I definitely noticed it was a little bit more sour because when milk is chilled, the sweet bacteria, the bacteria that make for a sweeter milk, they're reduced or, eliminated from the cold, and then it produces a bit of a more sour fermentation. Um,
Hmm.
that's how I do, my milk and my vegetable juice. every 4 to 5 days. I'll make probably like a half gallon at a time, and that gets me through the week pretty much. And I don't do that every day in the summer. I do sport formulas instead. They're a good replacement for me. For me at this point, the diet, sometimes people need more vegetable juice, sometimes they don't. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much how I store all my food. My eggs, I just leave out on the counter. I don't refrigerate them. So
I picked up a few tips from you there because I purchased my raw milk and it comes in plastic. It is refrigerated. I've never tried it where it's not refrigerated, but I do have some gallon glass jars that I could transfer to because you just want to get out of the plastic so it's not leaching any of the chemicals from there now.
yeah, I think after, some days it will start to leach. I don't think it's a very like dramatic process if they're just getting transferred in. Obviously there's a little bit probably, but if you get it out of glass, if you get it into glass as soon as possible, it's not a big deal. And milk in plastic is also not the worst because the nutrients in the milk will help bind with anything that gets in there from the plastic. So you don't really have to worry about it so much, although you don't want to ferment anything in plastic, whether it's like meat, eggs, or vegetable juice or dairy. You definitely want to ferment it or age it in something that's glass because the plastic is going to create a toxic environment for the food. And then, yeah, that would be like, as you said earlier, how do I know if I'm getting poisoned am I getting poisoned from the food or is it poison from poison? I think, well, that would be, you're getting food poisoning from poison. Just like, if you eat a restaurant and they get your chicken in a cleaning solution because someone forgot to wipe off the cutting surface, and then that gets in your food, and then that's making you sick. It's not the chicken, it's the poison. So it can be kind of hard to know when that is, but it's rest assured whatever you're reacting to is poison. It's likely not the food itself.
What about, I know there's a huge fear with like parasites in raw meats. What do you have to say about that? Or
Well,
bacteria,
I've eaten
salmonella?
Yeah, I've eaten at least 5 worms in my fish, and that's the only place I've seen worms is in cod, honestly, and monkfish. But I don't eat monkfish really anymore because it's kind of a bottom feeder that isn't a deep sea fish. But like cod is a deep sea fish, and I've only seen parasites in cod or like haddock. Um, and I I would break it up into my blender and I would see the worms and I'd say, okay, press blend, you know, um, I'm, you know, I'm fine. The acidic environment of the stomach is enough to kill like pretty much anything. It's like any parasites or eggs that are in food, you don't have to worry about it because it's going to take care of it.
So the
However,
parasite,
if
sorry.
if you're going to do something like helminthic therapy, one thing that's recommended is, or what people would do is they'll take the parasite eggs with Gatorade because that would alkalize the stomach and it would cut out the acid. If people on the primal diet wanted to put parasites in their body, they would just drink vegetable juice and that would neutralize the acids, the harmful acids to the parasites in the stomach. And then they could, do their thing. So, I mean, I don't know. I had a test done once at the doctor's probably 4 years ago, and they said your eosinophil levels are high, which is your body producing mucus. It could mean you have a parasite, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have one. And I was like, yeah, I don't care. It's like I feel fine. I'm not. It's not a thing. But there's people, like I said, who do the helminthic therapy who are not on the primal diet, and there's people who maybe have parasites who don't know it that are on the primal diet, and basically doing diet, it helps regenerate tissues. So the parasites, right, they eat the tissues in your body and that's why they're bad. But if you're eating a primal diet, you're regenerating the tissues the parasites are eating. So the parasites are eating the old toxic or dead tissues, and the body is creating new tissues because of the raw meat. So there really is no issue unless there's a parasite that should not be in the human body. That certainly exists. I'm not saying, all parasites are good. Take all the parasites you want. I'm not in a hurry to get parasites. Maybe I have some, maybe I don't know. But I'm not in a position where like I feel I need helminthic therapy for anything. So
What about bacteria like salmonella?
yeah, so you actually have E. coli and salmonella in your gut, and they're actually what helps you digest food. So when people talk about, say, it's just a boogeyman, honestly, you know, um, and I'm not even sure there's really, maybe there's salmonella on chicken, but I'm pretty sure it's on the egg shells. There's an oil coating on the egg shells, which is where salmonella is also. That's why they wash the eggs and like bleach and stuff, which is why you don't really want to get grocery stores or eggs from the grocery store, because who knows how porous that shell is and what's getting into the egg. But yeah, my eggs are unwashed and they sit on the counter. I don't eat eggshells. It's not good to eat eggshells. But I mean, I have eaten a couple before. No problems. The only time I've gotten ill from an egg was I ate this egg. It was in my friend's garage in the summer. His hens got into this garage and they laid eggs. And I went to, tap the egg. I tap it on one. Actually, here, I'll just do it now. I'll show you. I got my eggs on standby.
Putting on a show.
So, you got your eggs here and you tap the one side. You don't have to create a hole. You just have to break the seal, because the seal membrane inside of the shell is what keeps it in there. So on the bottom, you want to make a hole so you can slurp it out. And just like that.
You just got the whole egg through that little hole?
Yeah. But so I did that tap at my friend's, and this egg, it exploded in my mouth, on my face. And it was so hot in the garage. It was like almost cooked. It was almost looked like scrambled eggs a little bit or something. And I didn't really swallow much of it, but I got it in my mouth. I drove to his neighbors right across the street to get something, and we were driving back. I was waiting to pull out to cross the street, and I got this really bad stomach pain. I was like, oh man, I'm going to throw up. And I had to get out of the car, and I'm on my hands and knees, and I'm just, and my friend's like, oh, he was kind of embarrassed because like his neighbors were there anyway. But it was like, because they would think, oh, you're fucked up, you're drunk or something. But I just ate this egg, and yeah, and I threw up, and I felt better instantly. But that's like the only time I ate something and then immediately. But I'm pretty sure it was just the bacteria from the egg. There's an Aajonus story. So he was at a potluck or a Q&A, and some kid was there. This 2-year-old kid, very, not well behaved. Let's just say that. And Aajonus, he took a bit of raw egg and he put it in the kid's mouth. And then the kid started like projectile vomiting for like 5 minutes. And then after he was done vomiting, the kid just was like happy and well behaved. So like, yeah, there are times where like your body gets something that is necessary, like it can use instantly to detox. So because I didn't really eat that egg, it got in my mouth and I spit most of it out. But like, it wasn't like I ate the whole egg and then I got sick. It was like, no, I just got a little bit of that bacteria in my mouth. And then 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, I was hurling something up from my stomach. So, but yeah, that's pretty much the only time. And I don't even know, who knows? I didn't get that stuff tested. Who knows what bacteria that was? Maybe it was salmonella, maybe it wasn't. But yeah, I mean, eating the beef at first was for me like, okay, this is pretty normal. Actually, the first time I ate raw, it was actually buffalo, was when I was in Nepal. I was staying at the Hotel Suga, and the owner, he was very generous with things, and because he'd say, oh, this is your money, not my father's money. And because he had his dad was a landowner and left him a bunch of money. Anyway, he would give back to like his guests. And so we would drink whiskey and stuff at night. And he would always eat. And he brought chemo once. It was with raw buffalo with seasonings and spices. And I just had enough, whiskey in me to feel like, oh, I could eat, this raw meat. And nothing happened to me, but it was pretty good. But, I was kind of like thinking like, oh, well, like I ate that time and I'm fine. So, beef for me was like easy. The pork was a little bit of a big step. I was kind of like, oh, I was kind of worried about parasites, but then you eat the pork and you're like, wow, this is so delicious. And then, nothing you wake up the next day, you're fine. Um, and then, chicken was like, it's hard to find quality chicken. So it can be kind of hard to source, but if you can find it, you try it. So I ended up having to butcher some chickens, and I tried the chicken and it was great. I slept for like 9 hours. Like, now I've talked to a few people who like they eat chicken for the first time and they'll like sleep for like 9 hours because it's so relaxing. It's so calming. I had chicken for the first time in months a couple weeks ago, and I was at a family thing for Father's Day, and I had to go lay down on the couch and like take a nap because it just hit me like a ton of bricks. So yeah, different meats do different things. Once you kind of get used to eating raw meat, it's easier to break that next barrier. Like, yeah, like I mean, the raw chicken thing, it is kind of gross at first, but then you eat it, you're like, oh, it's not so bad, and then you feel how good it makes you feel, for most people, and you're kind of like, yeah, I want more of that, and you can make it nice. Like I post some pictures every now and again, like on my Twitter or my Instagram, and lately I've been making chicken and pork, just diced up with some olive oil and lemon, a little crushed black, white, and black pepper. Chop up some parsley leaves from my garden, and then I get some cherry tomatoes on there, and yeah, that's really good. That's great.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, you can make the food. There's a lot of different variations, and you can get creative. So
So it doesn't just have to be as bland as grabbing some raw ground beef and chugging it down.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people start out that way. Um, it's very easy to start out that way. Like, I think like how much time have I saved by not cooking, for the past 6 years? Not that there isn't a fair amount of meal prep involved. And honestly, I may have cut into that time with making vegetable juice because that can be kind of arduous. But um, yeah, yeah. Some people like they got a texture thing, they got a presentation thing, and they want to make it look nice or do something. You know, I didn't really need that. I just kind of jumped in, but everybody's different.
What was I gonna ask? Just had a brain fart. Damn, lost track. Do you eat any like cooked meals now at all? Like if you go on vacation for holidays?
No. Well, the last time I went to Italy, I was just a year into the diet, and I was cheating for about 10 days. Where like, yeah, I was having pasta and gelato, pizza, prosciutto, but I was eating, I was also eating raw meat every day. I was eating raw eggs every day. Um, the cheese was salted, but I was getting, the raw cheeses. Um, but yeah, I mean, so I was probably like 50% raw at that time. But yeah, I was eating, it's like, yeah, I got to get a carbonara. Yeah, I got to try a pizza. Um, have some of these cured meats and cheeses and, you know, the fruit. I mean, that's primal technically. It's like I'd buy a melon, walk around with a melon, and I, eat that when I was at my hotel a little bit every day. The gelato, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, you call it cheating, and yeah, it is what it is. But no, since then, I think what 2, 3 years later, I had a like I said, that piece of baked chicken, which is something that's recommended. Like if you're having a bad detox, and you want to stop it, you could have a piece of baked chicken. Technically, that's just for elderly people, but I mean, it applies to everybody. Like if you have to get back to work, you want to stop detoxing, like, you got to do what you got to do. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of think about like having a piece of pizza from time to time. Sometimes, just joking with friends, like I'll go through like a menu, like you're talking about some place to eat, and I would go through the menu and I would like pick out my meal, like, oh, this is what I would have, you know. I I'd like to go travel to Japan, you know, someday, and I don't know that I would keep to the diet there. Although I would have to experiment because the times I have had cooked food, I I don't feel good. Um, oh, there was one Thanksgiving where I did eat Thanksgiving food. And this was probably, I don't know, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. And it was awful. Like, I mean, the food, it tasted pretty good. Not as good as I remember it tasting. But I had just worst bowel movements for like 3 days. Like just large, dried out, not fun. And my stomach felt heavy. I didn't feel great for like 3 days. So I was kind of like, yeah, it's not really worth it to eat cooked food anymore because I feel like that. So yeah, your body does change and your chemistry does change and, eating that stuff. And that's something like, I think about going to Japan and like, oh yeah, maybe I would have like maybe I'll get a fried pork cutlet with some curry and rice and, that some ramen but I think about that and it's like psychologically, it's like, oh, that tickled something to my brain. But I know like if I ate that, I'd probably feel like death. And I don't want to ruin a vacation like if I'm over there. So thankfully Japan, like a lot of raw fish, I could just eat raw fish and some little bit of fruit, maybe some sugarcane juice so I could find it. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I would approach that. I don't have any vacations planned, but that's, thinking. Yeah, I'd like to enjoy the local cuisine. Maybe it's a vacation. It's 2 weeks, 10 days, 7 days. Um, but I don't know if it's going to ruin my vacation in a different way. I don't know if I would do it. So not a problem for me. Like with family and stuff. Like they know how I eat, and it's whatever. I'm not self conscious about it. People say, "Oh, aren't you worried?" Like you said, are you worried about parasites or something? And I'd say, yeah. I wish I'd get worms in my brain. I wish they'd eat my brain and then kill me. That's what I'll tell people because it just kind of shuts them up. Just because it's like
Yeah.
it's kind of funny, it's kind of funny. But it's kind of like, yeah, I'm not afraid either. Like I don't really. It's like I'm not taking you seriously. I'm not going to try to explain the science. I'm just going to kind of brush you off with this joke.
Yeah.
Am I worried about parasites? Yeah, I'm worried about when are they going to get here and eat my brain and kill me? Yeah, you know. So,
Yeah.
it's yeah, I don't.
So,
Some people, yeah, are not. Some people are not. They're not accepting. Some people I've talked to in their families, they're like, I can't do this around my family, or like I don't want to feel rude at Thanksgiving by not eating anything. It's like, well, then just have some turkey, you know, just it's like if you're stressing, it's like if you're gonna stress that much about like what you're eating around people and how like the dynamic and tensions that makes. Is that really healthy? Like, I mean, is it really healthy to do that and not just like, what's it to you? Like, for me, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't stress me out. So I don't really care about that, but it's different for other people. So that's kind of like some people would say, "Oh no, you have to eat raw all the time, and if you don't, you're gonna die. You're gonna get cancer. It's gonna be bad, and you'll never be healthy." And it's like we're already never gonna be healthy. Like I've had 50 injections. I'm screwed, man. Like
Mhm.
I'm gonna be detoxing until I die. I'm gonna detox to death. And so it's like, yeah, if I went on vacation, I'm not going to worry about if I wanted to eat a pork cutlet with some curry once, or have a couple drinks, which is, yeah, I had some unpasteurized beer a couple months ago at a family friend's house. And I ate like a raw egg and cheese every glass I had. And it was fine. I mean, I didn't really miss drinking, but it was kind of fun to have that. Um, but yeah, so it's just like some people, it's a psychological thing, you know, both ways. Because you think about like these times, these holidays, or these gatherings you'd have with people, and you have this food, this cooked food. It was delicious, and you have these memories with it, and that's just kind of linked in with your body and your mind. So you have this perception of like, you know, I, uh, I miss that. I want that. Um, but it's kind of a folly of man because it's like you can't recreate the past. It's like you can't recreate a moment. So you just have to kind of realize that it's like just because I eat this pizza now or this Thanksgiving meal, it's not gonna make anything like it was. It's just gonna be like it is now. And maybe that isn't going to be pleasurable for you because you've been on a different diet and your chemistry is different.
Mhm. I mean, overall, once I've made my dietary changes and stuff, the logic part of me kind of overrides any other decision where it's like, how am I going to feel afterwards? So you're saying you're going to Japan, you don't want to ruin a vacation. It's like, that makes the decision very easy for me because I'm pretty sensitive to whatever I put in my body. I know that if I consume something that my body doesn't agree with, I feel something immediately. It could be like literally 2 hours afterwards, but just knowing that, keeping that in the back of my head, which I think a lot of people are unaware of. And when you were talking about how if you eat a cooked meal now, you don't really feel too well afterwards, it almost sounds like the intolerance that people have to drinking pasteurized milk, where they think that they're lactose intolerant. But meanwhile, if you consume raw milk, there's a good likelihood that you'll be able to digest it perfectly fine. So it seems like the cooking of the food and destroying the enzymes, whatever minerals that would help you digest it. I'm curious if there's like some just low grade chronic inflammation in everyone that's eating cooked food. And then once you kind of eliminate that and you go for the raw, introducing that, then you'll start to see the symptoms. But because you're kind of at like this baseline level every day, so say for instance, if you were back to consuming the processed foods and that's all you don't really get the best night of sleep, you have these aches and these pains and you just consider that it's normal, you won't really know until you remove that stuff and then re-implement it again.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, if like that's all you know, that's all you know. So you got to try something different if that's the case and make changes. Another thing that's interesting is a lot of people who are on the diet and they'll eat cooked food like at a meal or something, they experience having nightmares. They'll have nightmares that night because they had cooked food. And I think that's because of the metals, the cauterized minerals in the cooked food. Because a lot of those metals store in your brain, and at night your neurological system detoxes. So I've started having dreams again slowly. They started about 4 years ago, 3 years ago. I started having dreams pretty regularly again because I didn't have dreams for so long. And I know, especially if I'm going through a detox, especially if it's like one of those, heavy brain detoxes where like my head's just throbbing and swollen, I'll have like delirium. or like, really strange dreams. So it's wild.
Do you ever notice if you eat sushi? I don't know if you're just eating the fish or if you're eating the rice and the seaweed with it, but I noticed that whenever I consume seaweed or sushi, things with iodine in it, that's when I tend to have like some epic dreams. They're like movie like where I don't even want to wake up for them. That's how good they are. It's like, oh no, I want to go back to sleep. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Yeah, so I mean, when I say sushi, I'm speaking about sashimi. I should probably use my words a little bit more carefully, but yeah, I haven't had sushi with rice in 3 years. So, and it was always with like the sushi with the rice. I wasn't having the rolls. I wouldn't eat the rolls. Um, but yeah, normally just sashimi for me. The last time I had rice or starches was when I was going through a adrenaline detox. I had insomnia. So I was using cooked starches to absorb some of those hormones. So cooked starches are like part of the primal diet, but as a needed basis for certain conditions or things.
Would that be like a similar to what you're saying? How older people consume something that's cooked in order to stop the detox? So you help
No,
like
no,
health and stuff.
no. It's not going to stop the detox. Because I have tried eating some salt-free sourdough, which is from a farm called Healthfully Farm out of New York, and they make perfect quality foods, primal foods. They have a salt-free sourdough that I bought just to try and to keep on hand. When I was going through a really intense that bowel detox I talked about earlier, I didn't have any cheese, so I tried to eat like butter and bread. So the butter, like the bread, could absorb, maybe something that was in my stomach, but it didn't work, and it didn't stop anything. Um, and the same thing when I had insomnia, I did sweet potatoes, baked sweet potatoes with lots of butter, sour cream, and um, yeah, it didn't. I'd eat like a half of one in the morning, and then I eat a half at night. Um, Eat it like throughout the day, like to get it into my system to help absorb those hormones, so I could try to sleep. But it didn't stop anything. I had insomnia for about 8 months. I ended up using like clay and milk, which would help me get like 4 hours of sleep, but which was enough to like survive. But I still felt like I was being, tortured. It was like like when you go through insomnia or sleep deprivation, you realize like just how awful it is, and like how like, oh yeah, I see why they torture people with this, because it's like I would do anything to just sleep for 8 hours. Like, and one day I just woke up and I was like, oh, I got 6 hours of sleep for the first time in 8 months straight through. And the detox had ended. So they didn't like taper off or anything. It just was gone one day. So just worked its way out of its system.
That does not sound very promising. And you just consider that a detox?
Yeah. So I feel like in my life, I was very skinny and I wasn't getting a lot of raw fat. I grew up, like on skim milk and stuff. So um, I feel like I was a very adrenaline charged person. So I had a lot of adrenaline stored, most likely. My adrenal glands were probably taxed, and I also probably had a lot of I still probably have a lot of metal in my nerves. Um, so like I said, the neurological system detoxes at night. When the sun goes down, it starts to detox. When this happens, like your your brain will start to release toxins. Um, if it's too much, then like you'll have insomnia, like from the metals or from the adrenaline. Um, and I knew it was adrenaline because when I would wake up and I was up. It wasn't like I woke up and I was groggy. It was like my eyes opened and I was alert and I couldn't go back to sleep. So, I was looking for answers, and then I finally found some information about this and did everything I could to target it. I had tinnitus, have tinnitus, or I got my tinnitus at the same time, roughly the same time this happened. So I'd just be laying in bed and trying to sleep, and just my ears are ringing and I can't sleep and I'm sleep deprived. it was honestly like the worst time in my life so far. It was just terrible. But yeah, this can happen to people. Like, when you do the diet, you can have an adrenaline detox. You could have insomnia. So you can, fix your sleep schedule so you're going to bed before it kicks in around midnight, and then after 5 a.m. when it stops, you 7 to 12, you wake up, be active during those hours, then take a nap before you go to work or whatever. I couldn't do that because of my schedule, but that's something people could do. The clay in the milk is helpful. So there's always like remedies or things you can do during a detox or for a detox. It may not, it's not going to help it go away like immediately, but it will like help your body like keep detoxing so it can heal. Because if you stop a detox, it could make it worse later on. So it's not advisable to like stop it unless it's maybe you're like elderly, or maybe you have, maybe you have something to do, like you have to go back to work because you need to get paid, something like that. Like you got to do what you got to do, but
Yeah,
that's
that's
what it
brutal,
is.
man.
Yeah, it's
It's
like I
brutal.
said, it's not healing. It isn't easy and it isn't fast. So you can't go in mind like, whoa, it's a quick fix. Like, no, it's a process. And it isn't necessarily that like you have to do something like this. Like, it is better if you do it 100%. You are going to get better faster. But even if you cut out all the bad foods, and even if you're just like 50% on the diet, 50% raw, the juices, the milk, the meat, the eggs, you're still going to get better. It's just going to be slower. Um, so, keep that in mind, especially if you're transitioning. You know, you may not want to jump in and do everything first. You may want to slowly. Some people start with milkshakes and smoothies and, raw eggs and vegetable juice, and then they'll graduate to like the meats and doing everything. But yeah, anytime you eat a piece of raw food, you increase your vitality. And, half the battle of health is not getting contaminated by whatever pollution is out there. So,
Yeah, that's where I'm currently at. I'm currently with the raw milk, raw cheeses, just started raw eggs. So I'm currently like a white belt with this Primal life, but we'll see where I go little by little. What would be your advice to anyone that's looking to get into this? Because as you mentioned before, like the conditioning is very, very strong, especially with things like chicken. It's like a step-by-step thing. How do you, because you guys work with people, how do you get people to overcome this initially?
well, the place to start is to read the books. We Want to Live, or The Recipe for Living Without Disease. Um, we Want to Live as a narrative, and it's got, a story in it. It has a second volume in the book, which has got a lot of health information pertinent to conditions and food types. So it's a very useful book. The Recipe for Living Without Disease is a recipe book, but it's a more of a science-based book. It has a lot of research studies about, why raw foods over cooked foods. It talks about some of Aajonus's influences, like um, Howell wrote a book called Enzyme Nutrition in the 50s, which is all about how enzymes are the key role in health and food. So, reading the Aajonus books are important, but it's also important to read the books and the people he talks about, because that's how he came to his conclusions too. Um, and also, if you're talking to other people about this, you can say, it's not just, well, Aajonus said, Aajonus said, Aajonus said. There's a lot of that. You can say, well, Edward Howell first talked about this in his book in the 50s, and he talked about these enzymes and how they're, important for human health. We only have so many of them, and how they're important in our foods, why they need to be there. So I'd start off with those two books, and then, start wherever you feel comfortable in terms of like what foods you want to eat. you know, if you want coaching, primaldietcoaching.com is a great website. There's a lot of people who knew Aajonus, who are clients of Aajonus, who've been on the diet for 13 years to 25 years. And if you, like, because everybody's like, they don't know Aajonus. Like, I didn't know Aajonus, right? I discovered this after he died. So a lot of people who start the diet, they're curious, what does this look like, for 13 years, 20 years, 25 years? Like, what am I getting into? Is it going to be worth it? Why should I stick on this? So, like, if you're really interested in that, those are the people you'd want to reach out and email and talk to, um, because they had the experience. They've been living it. They've been doing it, and they know way more than me. Like, they're the people I go to when I have questions. So, you know, um, I know enough to like help people get started, but in terms of someone was to talk about, well, how do you feel about it? Like on 10 years or later, it's like, well, I can tell you what these people told me, but if you want to hear it from them, you can talk to them. And that's, one of the purposes of this website is to connect people with, you know, people who knew Aajonus so they can get a real flavor for what he was like and how he helped their health journeys and their health journeys, after he passed. Um, we're, working on articles and stuff to publish there, different health topics. Um, yeah, I talked about my insomnia. I've got an article in there. I wrote about that, what I did, so if you're going through that, that can help you, because a lot of these things Aajonus he mentions in a couple paragraphs in his book, and there might be some alliteration to them in his question and answers or workshops. Primaldiet.net is a website it was the original Primal Diet website, and it's got a lot of workshops and Q&As on there. It's got a forum, and that's going to be reworked this year, I think. They want to update the search function and add some things to it, update it for the modern era, because it's a little bit antiquated, but it's still a good resource. Like, that's where you can go to buy the books and everything if you want. So that's where I would start, is just read the books and, find food sources near you. It's really easy to just use Google Maps and type in butcher in your location and, call butchers around you, see where they get their meat and how it's raised. Craigslist farm and garden section is a good place to look for animals or eggs. And it's that time of year. You got farmers markets going on. Getting to know those people is great, because they might be able to help you find, raw milk or somebody who has animals or meat. And getrawmilk.com. You can always go to Weston A. Price. They have a whole section of like chapters in each state and counties and cities. So if you're in an area and you're looking for foods, like, they should have a food list or resource of, everything in your area or close by. And like, that's a good place to get you started, because I mean, there are some people who eat raw in that Western A Price world. A lot of them don't, but pretty much all of them do the raw milk, which can be kind of hard to find. So if you can't find it on getrawmilk.com, try the Weston A Price. And yeah, I mean, really the best way is just to get to know farmers, and because they all know a guy who knows somebody, and that's a great way to find food and make connections too, right? If you know where your food's coming from, that's even better. So I have some videos about this on my YouTube, Eatrawmeat, Primal Diet Advice. Probably a good idea for an article too. I'll have to write that down on the list, where you're just kind of busy organizing the first inaugural Primal Diet Conference in Tazewell, Virginia, July 19th to July 21st. So we're expecting not a large turnout, but I think a pretty healthy turnout for a short notice first time conference. And it's going to be a great experience. I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of people. But if you're looking to meet people who are on the diet, that's also an event we're trying to start where people can come and learn. And because we're going to have classes, we'll be, harvesting an animal, and we're going to have a nice spread of primal foods and recipes for people to try. So even if people still eat cooked food, they're still welcome to come and learn and share, because I mean, everybody was there at one point. Some people like to turn their nose up. Oh, you're going to let people come who cook food, or you're going to have cooked food there. It's like, well, yeah, we were all there once. Like, we all cooked our food at one point, and it's up to us to be open to them and not be judgmental, and just kind of show them, hey, this is a way that you can eat and thrive as well. Like, so that's pretty much everything. Primaldiet.net, primaldietcoaching.com. And it is the internet. I mean, all the information is already out there in a million places you could find, but that's where I would try to send people. It's always good to have hard copies of things.
Yeah.
So, that's where you can actually buy the physical books.
I will include those in the show notes, brother. And yeah, I need to pick up the recipe book myself. I read We Want to Live in like 2 days. That's how good of a story that was. Even if it was fictitious at the time, that's why I wanted to kind of dive more into it, learn a little bit more about this lifestyle. But it's a really good read and very eye-opening considering what apparently his son went through. So
yeah, there's I'll give you the link, but there's an interview with Jeff, Aajonus' son. Someone did an interview with him. It's pretty interesting to read. So I'll make sure to get you that link too.
Cool. Appreciate that, man. And yeah, I like what you said about the getrawmilk.com. That's generally, if I'm traveling, I'm very, very picky about what I eat. So I want to go for like the high quality stuff. And that's what I'll start. Generally, if I find a farmer's market in whatever state that's carrying raw milk, that's really generally a good place to start.
Mm-hmm.
So carrying that, and they're probably carrying a lot of other good stuff too.
Right.
Yeah. So, Eatrawmeat, brother, I really appreciate your time today. I have one final question for you because I'm curious, what is your favorite cut of meat? Do you just eat like the typical ribeyes and stuff, or like what's your go-to?
So I'm not a rich man yet, so I'm not eating ribeyes every day. But I go for a sirloin tip or rump roast. It's from the rear leg of the cow, which is going to be a little bit more tender, and it's cost effective. I also enjoy chicken thighs, and for pork, I like sirloin chops because they've got a little bit of the sirloin and they've got a little bit of that's like regular pork meat. So it's a nice balance. So and in fish, I mean, there really aren't cuts of fish, but I would say the cod loins are better than the cod fillets. They're a lot flakier, a lot meatier.
So I have some ideas from where I can start my journey, and I'll keep you posted with that. See where I go with this one.
Absolutely. I'm here to help. So if you have questions, just hit me up.
Will do, brother. Again, thank you so much for your time. This was very, very interesting. You got me writing down a ton of notes over here, so I'm going to do some more diving. I really appreciate your time, brother.
Absolutely. Take care. Good talking with you.